All right, so very good afternoon to all of you, our cherished viewers of Hot Issues, and welcome to another exciting edition of your favorite program. So the president says the economy is not doing so well. In his words, the economy is poorer than he thought. Then comes the senior minister designate who says that, you know what, government would review the IMF deal. But what does these things mean for the Ghanaian economy? How poor is the Ghanaian economy, and how bad is an IMF deal for it to be reviewed by this new government? And thanks for staying with us. My guest for this afternoon is an investment banker. He is also executive chairman for InvestPro and former board member of Smith, former board member of Merchant Bank, and executive supervising director. Now he tells me that by that role, he was actually above the managing director of Merchant Bank at the time. He knows a lot when it comes to Ghana's economy. My guest, Nana Fredua-Pambo. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining.
Good afternoon, Winston. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you also. So you know much about the Ghanaian economy. How bad is Ghana's economy?
Ghana's economy, as I mentioned some time ago on your program, has reached a very critical stage. If you look at even just our debt stock to start with. As of July last year, the Bank of Ghana's summary financial report said that Ghana's total debt stock was 110 billion Ghana cedis.
The total is 119 billion Ghana cedis.
And then at the end of the year, it went to 119.9 billion.
How does that make the economy bad?
It makes the economy bad in terms of the debt servicing. If you have a situation where you have a budget deficit of almost 5.6 billion and your expected revenue has gone down by almost 42% from 12.8 billion US dollars to 9.8 billion US dollars. All you're doing is you are borrowing to plug the deficit. I
want us to understand this. For me, an ordinary person listening to you to understand. So we have a debt of 119 billion Ghana cedis. We have a budget deficit of, say, 7%. How does that affect the economy for you to say the economy is bad? What is the implication, the direct implication on the Ghanaian economy?
Let me break it down. It's as if you receive 100 cedis a month as your salary, and you've gone out and borrowed 200 Ghana cedis from the bank, of which you need 110 cedis to pay the interest component alone. That means that at the end of each month, when you get your salary of 100 cedis, you need to still go out every month and borrow an additional 10 cedis to add to your salary just to pay the interest component. And this is a vicious cycle that will continue ad infinitum. The tragedy is it doesn't allow you the breathing space for you to be able to put forward concrete programs to solve emerging issues. Case in point is the energy crisis we faced.
Yes, but looking at Ghana's economy, Nana Fredua-Pambo, and I would want to use the previous budget. So we had a budget of about 40 billion Ghana cedis.
Right.
Okay, you had interest payments of, say, 10 billion.
Right.
And then you had, salaries of about 12 billion also.
Exactly.
Then you have transfers of about 8 billion. And then you have, capital expenditure of 6 billion.
Right.
Now, if you look at it, it's more of saying that, okay, so per our revenue, yes, we're looking at a revenue of around 30 billion. And so if it was about 40 billion, then we had to borrow 8 billion. That is not so bad for an economy like ours, is it?
It is very bad for an economy like ours, in the sense that we went to the IMF for something called balance of payment support. Balance of payment support means that the level of your imports far exceed the amount you generate for your exports. So you need to borrow foreign exchange to be able to meet the obligations of your current imports. So it's almost like a subsidy from the IMF to be able to meet all your obligations that are due components of foreign exchange.
We'll get to the IMF point,
right.
But before we get to the IMF point, I just still want to understand, and for all our viewers, they want to understand, we've used the debt syndrome. We always use debt as a mark of saying the economy isn't doing very well. We do know, for instance, that we need, billions of dollars annually to bridge the infrastructural gap in this country. Where are we going to get that money from? If we are bridging those infrastructural gaps, in the words of the former president, John Dramani Mahama, these projects should be able to pay for themselves. So isn't it better for you, okay, to bridge those gaps, move on, the economy with years to come would reap the benefits and so becomes better off?
If you are borrowing to put the funds into productive ventures that can self-generate and pay off the debt, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Are you suggesting we didn't get into productive ventures?
If you look at the NDC and the campaign they run, it was all about infrastructure development. That
yes,
was
but my point is that is infrastructure not a productive venture?
Infrastructure as in building bridges, building roads, building schools, those types of infrastructure, if you are going to borrow funds and invest in those types of infrastructure, you are not going to get immediate monetary payback to be able to pay off the facility. Now, the other negative effect of debt accumulation is also GDP growth. 2012, Ghana's GDP grew by 8.8%. 2013, it fell to 7.3. 2014, it went down to 6.4. 2015, it ended at 3.9. And just 2016 is ending at 3.1.
Yes, but
and which tells you that the rate of growth of your economy is being hampered immensely by your inability to generate exports, to be able to generate employment, to be able to meet the maturing obligations of your debt stock in a way that is being funded by your production.
Okay, but let's get to the infrastructure bit. I'll come back to it, but let's get to the infrastructure bit. So if you borrow to build roads, it eases trade.
Sure.
You can tow the road. When people are able to trade, they pay taxes to you. That is recouping the money invested in the road, isn't it?
I'll give you specific examples.
No, simple yes or no. Simple yes or no to this one.
That is assuming that the factors underlying the road construction are being done in roads, in trade centers that will facilitate that which you are alluding to. Take the Eastern Corridor, Yendi. As we speak, this road project has been abandoned. Millions of dollars have been sunk into it.
It's been constructed. Sections of it have
sections
been constructed.
But in
Others
terms
were
of
ongoing,
exactly,
yes, but it's not being completed.
Precisely.
Yes,
so now the issue
doesn't
is
aid trade in that area.
If you've been on that road, like I have been quite recently, the Brazilians who were providing counterfunding are accusing the Ghanaian counterparts of not meeting the obligations that they were supposed to. So the Brazilians, as we speak now, have put down their tools. Almost all the Ghanaians have been laid off and the project has come to a standstill. Now, what about all the millions that have been sunk into such a project that wasn't completed? The other thing with road construction is if you are going to target, for example, a dual carriageway between, let's say, Accra and the northernmost point of Ghana, Garu, or let's say around Wa, to be able to facilitate trade between Ghana and our landlocked countries, Burkina, Niger, and Mali, to ensure that trade between these countries above us and Ghana, which has access to the port, is facilitated. You can collect tolls on the road, you can collect duties on the road, so that you reap back this investment. That makes sense. Look at Buankra. Buankra could have turned Ghana around in a major way.
So let
me just end on Buankra. Buankra will have been the new Tema of Ghana. It will have ensured that there will be a railway line constructed between Takoradi and Tema to Buankra, inland of Ashanti region, so that from the Ashanti region all the way up to Accra and the western region, you're not going to have these articulator tracks that have such a heavy toll or place such a heavy toll on our roads, including fuel consumption, accidents, and its antecedent issues that comes with congestion on the roads. Buankra could have been turned into an industrial hub, a new area for residential, well-planned, well-developed, with all the ancillary projects that comes with developing a new city. And yet, to this day, after all the money that the Ghana Shippers Council borrowed to construct Buankra, of which I was a board member between 2006 up to 2009, until I was kicked off unceremoniously by the previous government, which currently is crying foul because most of their appointees are being terminated. The issue about Ghanaians is we have such a short memory. 2009, up to 2009, I was on 9 boards. And most of them, I was relieved of my post through information that I read in the newspapers that a new board had been inaugurated.
Were you happy at the time?
Was I happy at that time?
Were you happy at the time when you were removed in that manner?
Winston, I wouldn't say I wasn't happy.
It's a simple yes
I think unhappy is an understatement.
Oh, unhappy is an understatement.
Exactly.
So should that be done again? If it was done in the past and you didn't like it, why do you say somebody shouldn't cry if it has been done to that person?
It shouldn't happen again. But
Good.
then,
so if it's happened, then it's bad.
But then, as bad as it is hypocritical when the shoe is on the other foot and somebody is crying foul.
But you
it is bad.
No, but you agree what is wrong.
What I'm saying is,
I would get to,
at least,
you know what? I'll get to these points, but I just want us to
point,
focus on the infrastructure bit.
These people were given letters of termination, at the very least. In my case, I read in the papers that the new board had been inaugurated. I wasn't even given a letter from the executive secretary of the presidency.
Well, now there's an act that says that once a new government comes in, the existing boards be dissolved. So as part of the transitional process now, we know it, when a new government comes in, you move on. So that's settled. But the point is that, are you suggesting that the infrastructure we built within the past administration, which we borrowed money for, are sort of wasted infrastructure, which would not drive this economy forward?
Everything has to be done holistically. Everything. You cannot live in isolation. Everything.
I wanted a simple yes or no to this
Winston, infrastructure by itself does not increase your GDP growth. Infrastructure by itself does not reduce inflation. Infrastructure by itself, in the immortal words of Ama Benuadio,
I thought infrastructure played a role
she said,
in GDP
Ama Benuadio said, road construction does not put food in your belly, nor does it put money in your pockets. Infrastructure by itself does not improve your economy. And if all you talk about is infrastructure, you end up just like the NDC did in the 2016 election.
Is there any infrastructure that the NDC embarked on which you believe would help drive this economy forward?
I think the expansion at the Kotoka International Airport was very impressive. I think that spending almost $29.7 million on the so-called renovation of the Kumasi Airport was a disaster and begs for questions, and I hope the independent prosecutor will be minded.
We're looking at the things they did which were good.
If you look at, if you look at the infrastructure, I think Takoradi expansion was very good. I believe some of the in-city roads that were done were impressive. The Accra Circle Interchange is a wonderful piece. So is the Kasua Interchange, which has also eased congestion. So there are infrastructural developments that the NDC embarked upon, which were very impressive. Now, on the other hand, if you converted Tamale domestic airport at a cost close to about 300 million to an international airport, only to have one flight depart from this international airport on a Hajj pilgrimage. Now,
Tamale was not at 300 million.
Almost 300 million.
300 million.
Almost 300 million, yes. Almost 300 million.
No, it was less than that. I get the figure for you.
Okay, but please do.
Yes, the Tamale airport was less than 300 million.
But please check it out. Now, if you invest so much in an airport and converting it into an international airport, and at the end of the day, you only have one international flight that has left that airport and couldn't even return to that airport again. Now, where's the value for money, or how do you justify that infrastructural development which you are boasting, putting it in your green book and patting yourself on the back that this is one of the greatest achievements of the NDC because we brought an international airport to the people of the northern region? Same thing with Ho construction of an airport at Ho. where do you expect that domestic airport to add value in terms of aviation and trade in Ghana? So it's also a case of misplaced priorities, which those infrastructural developments that the NDC embarked upon did not yield their desired results. And hence, when it came to the elections, Ghanaians, even though they saw most of these infrastructural developments, did not see the value in terms of its improvement in the economy, in their livelihood, and the overall change in Ghana as in GDP growth, inflation, and in terms of quality of people's lives.
Live on Hot Issues right here on TV3, and my guest this afternoon is Nana Fredu Agyeman-Pamo. So Nana, the bit about the Tamale Airport, yes, it's $174 million. Okay,
And
so
you concede that it's much more than what
when you
stated.
made the figure, we didn't add currency to it. So I have looked for the currency because we're talking
So
about dollars.
even at
I
presumed
at
4 cities, it's 600 million Ghana cedis.
yes. So 174 million Ghana
190.
74.
$174 million.
Funded by, a Brazilian, we're told that it was funded by Brazilian government and was taken by, Curious Covar, the company that worked on the Circle Interchange.
Including Kasua.
Yes, but Nana, my point in all of this, I still would want to understand something. My point in all of this is that there are certain infrastructure. We're told the Circle Interchange would save the country 100 million, Cs annually.
And how is that? How did that come
That's
about?
according to President Mahama. Unless you have an independent, research.
No, but what was the basis for President Mahama
I'm not
stating that? But then we have to interpret.
Yes, but unless you have something to the contrary. Do you have a contrary figure?
I would say that in order to state a figure that huge, you would need to understand first what was in existence, as in how people lost. This is really opportunity cost in economics. What were people losing before the interchange was constructed? And those people who were losing that since the interchange was constructed, how has it benefited them? Now, at this stage, it will be impossible for the president to even have that data to make that pronouncement. You will need about 2 to 5 years to be able to collate data.
He said it was expected to save us.
Expected to save
yes, that's
us.
expectation,
so,
to save us that amount of money.
Well, President Rawlings, in his wisdom, has said that the NDC needs to adopt 2 things, truthfulness and candor. Yesterday...
You seem to have a problem with the NDC.
I don't. I don't, Winston. I really wish, I would hate for Ghana to be a one-party state.
No, so you seem you have. I mean,
but I really want...
You've been making reference
I want
to...
the NDC to be a better party. It is in Ghana's best interest. There's no way I would want Ghana to just have one political party and become sort of a monopoly and almost abuse of privileges, like Nkrumah did. I would hate that.
Yes, but
the NDC seems
it's
to...
as if you have a challenge with the NDC. You started by saying the very people who got you out, I don't know whether it was because you were gotten out as a board member, but when you make the point that today they are complaining, but yesterday they did the same thing to me, it's as if you have an issue with the NDC.
I don't.
And so based on that...
Actually, I do. And let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
Let me tell you why. I wish the NDC, instead of trying to point the finger as to who caused them, would rather sit down and do an introspective review of what they have become. The NDC is no longer the party of integrity, justice, and probity. That is not the NDC that we witnessed over the past 4 years. I wish the NDC would become a grassroots party, a party that people who ordinarily wouldn't have any say in politics can use as an avenue to become somebody. I respect the NDC for what it stands for, but not what it has become today.
You see the same thing in the NPP as a party for the grassroots?
NPP, based on the last election, absolutely. Because based on the last election, based on the election that was conducted by Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo in 2016, no billboards, no show of opulence, no flow of 24x4 vehicles, veering off roads into constituencies to do elections, no giving of monies and outward show of money, nothing like that. It was a campaign well coordinated on the ground where people could identify with the NPP, which was a massive deviation from what the NPP was perceived to be. So it's as if the NDC has abandoned the platform that they stood upon, which gave them that leverage to win elections in 1992, 1996, and 2008, and taking up the same things that the NPP were being accused of into 2016. And that is what I'm talking about.
Nana Fredia Ajman Pambo, I see you seem to agree with former President Rawlings on this particular issue, but moving forward and still staying with, you know, issues of the economy. Now that you say the economy is poor, the economy is bad, what can be done to make the economy that economy which you would want to see?
I believe that I'll start first with the debt. I think we have almost 500 million US dollars, the first Eurobond that was issued in 2017, that is due in October of this year. We actually issued an Eurobond of 750. We paid off 250 million in 2013. 500 million is due in October. I think for starters, not like going through HIPIC, but the Nana Addo administration will be better served to put together a very high-powered team to engage our creditors, especially the 500 million that is due in October, and to come up with a new strategy of renegotiating the payment, deferring it, getting a longer repayment period, seeing if they can negotiate the interest rate so that October they don't find themselves holding the shorter end of the stick.
But Asafmafo says they would borrow to refinance some of these debts.
I think that is what I was talking about.
Yes, yeah, so they are going to borrow.
Asafmafo is the senior minister, all right. But then there's also the substantive minister who is in charge of finance. And
he's supposed to be coordinating the economic sectors of the economy. So clearly, if he speaks, who are we not to take it seriously?
Winston, if the NPP starts making the same mistakes that the NDC made,
and you see that borrowing as a mistake,
you would find me sitting here a year from now speaking the same way I'm speaking against the NDC.
So would borrowing be a mistake?
To put this on record, I'm a nationalist. I am for Ghana first. And the only reason why you might find me having an issue with the NDC is there's very little in terms of complementary things to talk about the NDC in terms of how they run the country over the past 4 years. If the NPP comes in and starts making the same mistakes that the NDC did, you would find me here a year from now singing a different tune.
So my point is that would borrowing to refinance these debts constitute a wrong thing?
Absolutely. There's no way you can borrow to repay an existing facility. That's suicidal. When does it stop? You will need to engage we all have, as businessmen, we find ourselves in situations where you have a business plan, you have a productive venture, things do not go according to plan. For example, one would have expected that in the 2016 budget, government would have had a sinking fund to say that government is setting these funds aside based on the fact that in October 2017, we will have to pay 500 million US dollars on our first Eurobonds. And we are saving towards that in an orderly fashion so that we can retire this facility in 2017. There was nothing like that in the 2016 budget. Now, as far as I know, October is only about 9 or 10 months away. The NPP government does not and will not have the funds through either internally generated funds or domestic funds to be able to pay off this facility. The sooner they put together a high-powered team, bring people like Dr. Kwabena Dufo on board, get somebody like Kofi Annan as the chairman, put together reputable people who are well respected in the global economy to engage your creditors to say that, listen guys, we are not saying we are not going to pay, but something went wrong. And at the moment, we need to negotiate this facility. We need much more time. We need much better interest rates because 8.5 as the interest rate is still high in terms of the international markets, when the UK and the US prime rate is 0.24 and 0.50. So you need to engage your creditors to see how best you can extend your tenure.
Is it that easy?
It is easy.
Really?
It is all about the confidence and the plan you put in place. You can go to any bank in developed markets with a business plan to be able to convince them that I have this business plan.
But there's a bond you've gone for.
Yes.
You went for it over a 10-year period.
Yes.
Okay. And so you were paying interest, and then the
principal.
The principal is due.
Exactly.
What else do you want? You extend it, you pay interest again.
You pay interest again,
Exactly.
but at
So
least.
why don't you borrow?
At least.
So, no, hold on. Now. If you would extend and pay interest, why don't you borrow, over a longer period at a lower rate and offset it?
Prior to 2016, 2015, Ghana borrowed $1 billion at the unprecedented interest rate of 10.75. This is the highest that any sovereign country has ever paid for a bond or for the issuance of a euro bond. 10.75. If you go into the market to borrow funds to repay an existing facility, you will be punished.
Because so Safmafo says we would negotiate to have lower interest rates and then use them to offset the current one.
If you can do that, that is great.
Can it be done?
I'm saying that it depends on the business plan, the show of confidence, and the credibility of the people leading that delegation. And
so
that's why I said that.
So it can be done.
It can be done. And
sure.
That's why I said that you will need to bring in people like Dr. Kwabena Dufour, people like Kofi Annan, not just Osafo Mafo or a team which is solely out of the NPP, but you need to show that this is a team that is credible, that is internationally recognized and accepted, and they carry weight. Most importantly, you don't go into a negotiation with the weakest arm. You bring together people who are respected, who know what they are talking about, and that gives you gravitas. And that is the point I'm making.
So it's not bad to borrow after all to offset this euro bond?
Depends on how you renegotiate it.
If
If you can get a lower interest rate, and if you can get a prepayment period of 20 years, why not? But at the same time, you need to be mindful of your existing debt.
Must we always borrow as a
Winston,
people?
It is the tragedy.
Must we?
It is the tragedy. And that's why I say that you don't cut your coat according to your size. You cut your coat according to your cloth.
That's actually the idiom. The idiom says cut your coat according to your cloth.
That is a wrong idiom. It is cut. It should be cut your coat according to your cloth.
That's what I'm saying. That's what the idiom says.
2 yards,
cut your coat according to your cloth.
Yeah.
But we have made it cut your coat according to your size.
You should cut your coat. If you have 2 yards and you find out that you are a size 20, don't go and borrow from somebody and buy 6 more yards to do a shirt. Find a way to construct the 2 yards into a psychedelic t-shirt or a singlet, so that at least it covers part of yourself and you can still go out there. And that is the tragedy. We always seem to have a budget deficit, which requires that we need to go out there, issue a euro bond, or raise domestic debt to unsustainable levels. The reason why you have the commercial banks not giving credit to private corporations and individuals is that the government has crowded out credit in the private sector as far as the banks are concerned. Government borrows too much domestically. And for a bank, it is much safer, better to lend to the government than even the top tier corporations in the world. So unless government weans itself of domestic debt, it's not going anywhere. Unless we have a balanced budget whereby we know that our expenditure is going to be 20 cedis, and therefore we need to ensure that our revenue is 22, or worst case scenario 20. But this mind-boggling way of doing budgets where we all put together our budgets and it comes to 40 cedis, only to realize that our total revenue is 20 and therefore we need to borrow 20. We don't do budgets like that. That is obsolete, that is unhealthy, and that is damn suicidal in the long run. What you need to do is look at your revenue first. How much do I have? And then cut your coat according to your cloth.
So you're suggesting we shouldn't go outside our revenue. We must stick to the revenue.
We must. And in doing that, you know, that brings me to the immortal words of Dan Latte. What did Dan Latte say?
Tell me.
What did Dan Latte say? What was his
That we
motto?
domesticate?
Precisely. Ensure that you have local industries, one village, one dam, one district, one factory.
But that comes with money. That you need money to do all these things.
It's through public-private partnership. As a government, government has no business being in business. Government must be very careful.
But government must create the environment.
Government must be very careful. Government will create the environment.
And sometimes it takes money to create the environment.
Certainly. And through the projected revenue, government can do that. But when government starts crowding out the private sector, and I think Anado has said that if you want to make money in this government, don't become part of the public sector. If you want to be a business person, by all means, go out there and make all the money you need to make.
Thanks for staying with us. I still have Nana Fredua Jiman Pambo here with me. He is an investment banker and executive chairman of InvestPro. He's also a former board member of SNIT, former board member of the Shippers Council, former board member of Merchant Bank. He knows a lot when it comes to these issues. So, Nana, finally on the economy bit, you're saying we must borrow, but must borrow at the right terms and ensure that we can develop this country. Can we ever say that we are not going to go for any loan anywhere and yet be able to engage in infrastructural development?
Winston, I will bring it home. Most of us in Ghana have built houses, unlike the US or developed markets where you need to take a mortgage. We've developed ourselves, we've bought our own cars.
There are lots more people who don't have these houses.
I'm saying that
only
there
the
are
few
people
who can afford it.
But there are people who have bought cars, people who have bought their own or built their own houses, and very few people have used bank credit to build their houses or buy cars. Very few people. It tells you that if you run a government, which you should as a corporation, but with social responsibilities, like even all businessmen do, in terms of contributions to your church, your external family, and friends. We all have social responsibilities. Then a government or any responsible government must have social responsibilities. But most importantly, you should run the government as a corporation. You will find out that you are making decisions based on prudence and truth. The moment you get into government and it becomes spinning, and at every turn, all you want to do is mislead, abuse, and be corrupt, you would have to borrow. Because borrowing comes with a certain lifestyle. If you cannot see the truth as it pertains to putting Ghana first, and what you are concerned about is 20% cut before the contract is even awarded, you are not going to get value for money before the construction is done. Ultimately, that 20% that you, the minister or the president, is going to collect will end up being a debt to the country, and you will need to borrow money to repay that. So we can get there, but it comes with a change in attitude. There must be a major paradigm shift in terms of the way public officials who are either elected or appointed into office treat Ghana as corporate Ghana. If any of these guys were working for any corporation which had good auditors, most of them would either be fired or end up being prosecuted for fraud. Tragically in Ghana, being elected or being appointed into political office means that you can steal with impunity, get away with it, and flaunt it after you are out of office or even during the time that you are in office. And that is the tragedy of corporate Ghana.
How do you prove that?
How do you prove that?
I'm asking you, how do you prove that that's what happens in Ghana?
I would give you an example.
Go ahead.
There was a tenant of ours, family tenant, who was renting an apartment in our house in Kumasi. And he used to struggle so hard to pay his rent, so hard, until he became a party executive of a particular party, which I will not mention the name.
But how do I know you're telling me the truth?
Winston, I have nothing to lose or nothing to gain.
No, but how do I know you're
But
telling
I'm just
me the
giving you an
truth?
example of this particular instance. This guy, about a year or two after the government came into power, I'm not talking about the NDC, neither am I referring to the NPP. I'm just stating a point.
You're referring to one of these parties.
I'm just making a point because over Ghana's history, over the past, let's say, 30 years, these are the two dominant parties that have been in power. And this guy was able to construct a building. And you ask yourself that being a party executive, I think a regional secretary, what business would this person have to be able to do something like that? If you look at the scandals, JIDA, SADA, National Scholarship Secretariat, Smarties.
Was he involved in any of these?
I'm not talking about this particular person, but I'm saying that...
But if you make reference to these scandals, it means you're making reference to the NDC.
Well, if the cap
because
fits...
because
if the
these
cap
scandals
fits,
happen under the NDC.
I'm saying
so
that
you're
recent...
Suggesting that
recent. I'm talking about recent times.
No,
I could talk about the NPP
so
too.
you're suggesting that the... a regional executive within the NDC in the Ashanti region.
No, I didn't say that.
No, because
I said that.
Then you need to come clear here, because once you make reference,
a clear demarcation.
Once you make reference to scandals such as JIDA,
right?
JIDA
I said that
under the NDC.
This regional
under the NDC.
Okay, this regional secretary. This regional secretary.
Yes.
This regional secretary was actually in the NPP regime.
Good.
Okay, so if you want me to be specific, this regional secretary was in the NPP. Oh, no. Sampine just became a regional secretary quite recently.
Then you can just mention the name, because now that you say it's not Sampine, you can
But I'm saying that at that time, this person managed to construct a building. Now, the
maybe he worked hard for it.
Well, all I'm saying is, during the NDC time, there were, even if you want, look at Ameri, look at Kapoha.
Well, we need to move on.
You said something and I want to look at the Mary and Kapoha. We are paying between 10 to 13 cents for all other power producers, and we are paying almost 20 cents for Ameri and Kapoha. Why?
Moving on, why is it necessary to review the IMF deal?
The IMF deal, I think, was flawed from the beginning. And I'll take you back to the, I think it's Daily Graphic, September 11, 2015, when the Honorable Deputy for Finance, Honorable Atuforsin, said government does not need approval for IMF support. Now, there's a reason why I would want to be very factual, and that is why I am bringing this up.
Yes, go ahead.
He says that, and this is a quote by the Honorable Deputy Minister, clearly this is a case of lack of understanding. The threat of legal action is empty. We, that is, we the NDC or the government of Ghana, broke no law or rule. We did not breach the Constitution. This is born out of ignorance. The loan will be serviced by the Bank of Ghana from its own operations, just like all IMF programs. Now, I would like to turn to the Bank of Ghana.
What about the Bank of Ghana?
The Bank of Ghana does not have a mandate to borrow external funds. If you look at...
Based on which provisions?
The Bank of Ghana, if you look at its provisions, the Bank of Ghana can only borrow for a period, and I would want, that's why I said I would want to be as factual
yes, go ahead
as
and
possible.
Be factual.
The primary objective of the Bank of Ghana is to maintain stability in the general level of prices. Without prejudice to subsection 1 above, the bank shall support the general economic policy of the government and promote economic growth and effective and efficient operation of banking and credit systems in the country, independent of instructions from the government or any other authority. Now, the functions of the Bank of Ghana are listed from A to J according to the legislative instrument that set up the Bank of Ghana. And on page 20, it says power to borrow and guarantee. And it says the Bank of Ghana can borrow money from foreign institutions for a period not exceeding 90 days for the day-to-day operations of the bank.
Go on.
That is it. If you want to cross-check, you can, but that is it. the only power to borrow and guarantee says that it can borrow money from foreign institutions for a period not exceeding 90 days for the day-to-day operations
So how
of the
does
bank.
this affect
Now,
the review?
let me go to the IMF. The issue of IMF lending aims to implement adjustment policies and reforms that will restore conditions for strong and sustainable growth, employment, and social investment before a member country can receive a loan. Now,
So
I would like to
why
underline
do we need
that.
to review
I would
it?
like to underline that. The IMF only lends to its member countries, which are 189
Of which
in
we are
total,
one of them.
Of which we are one of them. The IMF cannot, must not, and will never lend to an institution because the IMF does not give just money. It gives you money with conditionalities to improve and change your policies
Why
and systems.
do we need to review it?
We need to review it in the sense that the policies that the IMF gave to the government of Ghana must have been discussed and approved in Parliament because these policies are still affecting the government of the day.
The government
Taxes,
says these are policies
I'm
we
saying-
agreed on as a government and sent to the IMF. It was part of the Senchi consensus. They are homegrown policies.
I agree. There's nothing
So?
wrong with that. But
So?
before in the Constitution, in its wisdom, ensured that Ghana's debt stock at any point in time must be approved, agreed, and known by the Parliament, which represents the legislative arm of government. You cannot go and borrow money as a government or as the executive branch and saddle all of Ghanaians with it.
Hence,
and therefore,
a need for a review.
Absolutely. Because if you look at the taxes, Winston, all those taxes that we had were propped by the IMF. If you look at the issue of freezing public employment in the public sector, these are all IMF policies that were given. It was a situation of tightening your belt and managing your fiscal policy to bring down inflation and drive down your level of expenditure.
Nana Fridiajiman Pambo, on that note, thank you very much for joining us.
I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
We're also very grateful for having you this afternoon right here on Hot Issues on TV3 with me, Winston. And on behalf of the whole team, I say thank you so much for joining us. Do have a lovely weekend and make sure you join us same time next week. Bye for now.